The Forest Preserve District of Cook County's River Trail Nature Center hosted Maple Syrup Days, a tradition more than 30 years in the making, on March 19th and 20th, 2011. Join us now for a little tour. If you attended, relive a few nice memories. And if you didn't, see what you missed and plan to be there next year. Let's start with a tree tapping walk, led by naturalist Ryan DePaul.
Well, today we're learning about maple syrup. This is a very special time of year. We find that maple syrup actually comes from the sap of a very special tree, a tree we call sugar maple. Can you say sugar maple? Sugar maple. Very good, sugar maple. Now, when I have my groups come out, I like to ask my groups to help me be a sugar maple tree. Because the first thing of our process, even though maple syrup has been around a long time since the Native Americans, the process has stayed the same. It's the tools that have changed. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to find a sugar maple tree. So if we're going to be a good sugar maple tree, we need to plant our feet in the ground. And I see you plant your feet really good. You can wiggle your toes become your roots. Because right now your roots are going to be sucking up water and nutrients from the ground. Sugar maple trees stand very tall and straight. And as a tree grows, your branches kind of go out to the side, making sure not to crowd any other sugar maple trees around you. Sugar maple trees have what we call opposite branches. Some trees, their branches might grow a little bit differently. I think that's our Egyptian tree. We call that alternate branching. But when we're looking for a sugar maple tree, we've got a very tall, straight tree with opposite branches. And people say in the wintertime it's very hard to find what sort of trees are out there or to identify the trees. Because, are there any leaves on our trees right now? No. But are our trees dead? No. Well, these trees are still very much alive. They're just storing up their energy during the winter time. Now, one of the ways we can identify a tree in the winter is by looking at their bark. Some of these trees have very specific bark. It's very deep or has special designs to it. Sugar maples have kind of an unusual bark. Some people say it looks a little bit like reptile skin. It might be a little bit scaly. What do you think about this tree right here behind me? Does that kind of look maybe like the back of an alligator or a crocodile? Absolutely. So when we go for our walk into the woods, we're looking for a tall, straight tree, opposite branches, and kind of scaly crocodile bark. Are you ready to look for that? Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a walk around the bend. We're going to go a little bit farther and find ourselves a sugar maple tree. Are you ready?
I see one.
All right, yeah, you can see one, I bet. There's some that, just like people, we need to be very careful when we take something from a tree. If we draw blood from a person, we want to make sure that they're old enough and healthy enough to draw blood. When we draw water or the lifeblood from a tree, we want to make sure that the tree is healthy and old enough to be able to do that. Well, people that have been doing sugar mapling for a long time have kind of made some decisions that trees need to be a certain size. A tree that's about 10 inches in diameter is just about large enough to tap to collect syrup or sap that turns into syrup. 10 inches is about a tree that's about 40 years old. Can you be a sugar maple tree for me? Put your arms out to the side really good, opposite branching, tall and straight. This tool that I'm holding here is what we call a calipers. And this is how we measure our sugar maple trees. I'm going to measure you as a sugar maple tree. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. 7 inches. Is she big enough to be tapped? No. You're a little bit too small. Thank you very much for volunteering. What do you think? If I were to measure myself, would I be big enough? 14 inches! Not quite enough for 2 taps, but I'm big enough. But we use these calipers to measure our sugar maple trees. Here I've got a tall tree behind me. It's got crocodile alligator skin. If I were to measure a tree like this, about 25 inches. That's at least 3 taps if we had a healthy tree. This is not the tree we're going to be going with today, but this is a great example of a sugar maple. Scaly bark, very tall, opposite branching. Pretty neat tree for us to be able to take a look at and learn from. Now what I'd like to do is we have a tree very close by that doesn't have a bucket hanging from it that we would like to demonstrate how these trees are tapped. you get as far as it's willing to go. I think you got it right there.
Now let's take a trip inside the Sugar Shack, where naturalist Sarah Rose will tell us about the modern methods of making maple syrup.
Now what we want to do is go from 3% sugar to about 67% sugar. And to do that, we just have to cook off the water. However, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of sap to make just a little syrup. It takes about 40 gallons of sap, enough to fill all of those jugs there, just to make 1 gallon of syrup. And what we do is we put it in this evaporator, which is heated with a wood fire. And this is to maximize the evaporation, to maximize the water loss. We would constantly pour the sap in at one end, and the sap will move through here. And as the level of sap decreases, we keep adding more. Remember, we're going from 40 gallons to 1 gallon, so we're cooking off a lot of water. And over time, we would keep adding sap to the water, cooking off. Eventually, we'd be able to cook this down to about 67% sugar. We would look for two things. One is we would look at the thermometer, and the 0 on this particular thermometer represents the boiling point of water. This is made specifically for the evaporator, and what we're looking for is the temperature to go above the boiling point of water. Of course, water by itself can't keep taking on more heat. It's always going to stay around its boiling point. But a sugar solution can get hotter than the boiling point of water. And we're looking for the temperature to start increasing. As that temperature increases, I would start testing this. I would draw a small sample of syrup, or what I hope is going to be syrup, off of this. And I would test it with our syrup thermometer, and this would be fairly dense. When you pour the syrup on pancakes, it's pretty thick. And if this were ready, when I drop the hydrometer in, it would float. Now right now this is sinking to the bottom. But when it's ready, when it has about 67% sugar, this red line will be level to the cooler. That's not ready because we have to cook it. Now we can get different syrups, different grades of syrups throughout the season. The pine tapping season is maybe 3 to 6 weeks long, on days that we have that are above freezing with nights below freezing, and so that varies a little bit from year to year. At the beginning of the season, the sap is a little sweeter than at the end of the season, so at the beginning of the season we don't have to cook it quite as long, concentrate sugar. The beginning of the season produces a syrup that's very light in color, grade A, amber syrup. And that's very mild. It's all the syrups are about 66 or 67% sugar, but the flavor is very mild at the beginning of the season. In the middle of the season, we get a darker syrup. It's a little more caramelized. We have to cook it down a little bit more to get that same concentration of sugar. We also start getting a little more plant flavor as the tree approaches spring. And the flavor gets a little stronger. So the A and the B are sold as maple syrup to put on your pancakes or your waffles. And then at the end of the season, we might get what we call a C-grade syrup. And that's the one that looks like molasses in that case over there. It's very dark because it has to be cooked a little longer. You start getting a lot more plant flavor into it. So it's sweet, but it's also a little bit bitter. And that C-grade of syrup is used for flavoring, maybe flavoring what we call maple flavored syrups or pancake syrups that are mostly corn syrup with little maple in them. They can also be used as a flavoring maple flavored baked goods or maple flavored candies. You can also take this sap, cook it down to syrup, then cook it beyond the syrup point in a smaller vessel to the point where it crystallizes. And you've taken all of the moisture out of it and you end up with maple sugar. And we make maple sugar candies out of that. The maple sugar is very similar to granulated sugar. It has a little bit of coloring in it, just from the plant material, from the caramelization, so it's a little bit brown, and that can be used the way you use granulated sugar as well.
Naturalists Darlene Young and Karen Holmes and volunteer Marty Holmes put on demonstrations about the Native American and pioneer methods of making maple syrup. Let's listen in now as Marty tells us more about how pioneers collected sap.
So the pioneers would make a spout that they could insert into the tree. They'd make a spout called a spile, and they'd use, this is a staghorn sumac. It's kind of fuzzy feeling. Right? The beautiful thing about it, it has a soft, pithy core inside. You can see it's kind of got a white ring and then yellow right in the middle. That soft, that soft, pithy core, you can take a hot iron poker and stick it in. You can see the smoke coming out as it's burning its way through. So I just burned a hole all the way through the center of this. I'm halfway done with making a spile. You can see it's got kind of a small opening on the end, so not too much sap is going to be able to flow into that small opening. If I take my knife, I can slice away at it, make a much bigger opening. Right, that's the end that I'm going to stick into the tree. So pioneers would drill using a hand auger. They drill a hole in the side of the tree, take their spile and stick it in. Now instead of the sap just coming out of the tree and running down the trunk, the sap is going to run out to the end of this and drip nice and neat into the oak bucket that I placed under the tree. So this is how the pioneers would do it. They would collect in the oak buckets. Right? They would collect it and they would bring it over to their boil down pot, this big pot here. Now whether it's the pioneers or the modern sugar shack over here or the Native Americans, they were all trying to do the same thing. Boil away the water and concentrate the sugar. If you want syrup to put it on your pancakes, take about 40 gallons of sap and boil it down to about 1 gallon of syrup. If you want sugar to carry around with you and cure your meat like the Native Americans did, you have to boil it even further. You probably end up with maybe, I don't know, 3/4 or a cup of sugar after doing all of that. But they would do it because it was worth it. There was a way for them to season their food, a way for them to cure their meat so they could carry it around.